If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Clara Miller was 62 years old, and she was invisible. She lived inside a 1999 Saturn sedan, parked in the cracked asphalt lot of the Steel Grill Diner, just outside Toledo, Ohio. The November air smelled like cold metal and impending snow, a scent that seeped through the car's failing weather stripping. She was the widow of Mike Miller, a Marine who had served 2 tours in Vietnam. He had survived the war, only to be consumed decades later by a cancer linked to the toxins he'd breathed in, the jungle. His illness had been slow, then fast, and utterly bankrupting. The American medical system, in its infinite coldness, had taken their home, their savings, and finally, their future, leaving Clara with only this rusting sedan and the agonizing memory of a life well lived. Her entire world, the physical proof of her 40-year marriage, was contained in a 10x10 storage unit at a place called Pay and Store It. Before we dive deeper into Clara's story, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city and country in the comments right now. Inside that cold corrugated metal box sat a simple wooden urn holding Mike's ashes. Beside it rested his folded service flag, the triangle of stars and stripes crisp and proud. Below that, stacked photo albums chronicled a life, their first dance, the birth of a child lost too soon, 50th anniversaries. These were not just things. They were the last bastion of her identity, the final proof that she and Mike had mattered at all. Clara was proud, which made the shame of her situation a heavier burden than the cold. She did not beg. She used the 24-hour gas station bathroom down the street to wash her face, her hands trembling as she smoothed her gray hair, trying to maintain the dignity Mike always said she possessed. The diner employees sometimes left a bag of day-old muffins by the side door, an act of pity she accepted with a silent, grateful nod. She was a ghost in the periphery of society, a testament to a system that honors its veterans with bronze statues and patriotic parades, but abandons their widows to die of exposure in a parking lot. Her fight was not just for survival, it was a fight for memory. The engine of the Saturn coughed to life twice a day, running for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 at night, just long enough to burn a quarter tank of gas she could not afford, all to keep the frost from settling permanently on the inside of the windshield. The Ohio winter was a predator, stalking her, waiting for her to run out of fuel or hope. She clutched her thin coat tighter. The local police had already knocked on her window twice, their flashlights blinding her, telling her she couldn't loiter. They threatened to tow the car, her only shelter, calling it vagrancy. She was just a piece of trash to be swept away, an inconvenience in their tidy, ordered world. Her husband, Mike, had been a man of absolute principle. He believed in God, the Marine Corps, and paying what you owed. He had worked at the local auto plant for 40 years after his service. He fixed things. He provided. As the cancer ate away at him, his greatest fear was not death, but leaving Clara in debt. "It'll be fine, Mike," she had lied to him, holding his hand, the skin stretched like paper over his bones. "I'll be taken care of." Now, that lie haunted her. The system he had trusted, the country he had served, had devoured their legacy whole. The astronomical hospital bills were a cruel joke, a final insult to a life of hard work. She tracked her finances on the back of a gas receipt. She had $43 to her name. $43 stood between her and freezing, between her and starvation, and between her and the impending loss of Mike's remains. The storage unit was 3 months past due. The bill was $267, a sum that was, to her, as vast and unattainable as the moon. The manager of the facility, a man named Henderson, had posted the final notice. The contents of Unit 14B would be sold at public auction tomorrow at noon. She was out of time, out of options, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. Clara looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were sunken, defeated, but beneath the exhaustion, a flicker of Mike's resilience remained. She would not let them sell him. She would not let strangers pick through the fragments of their life, placing bids on his honor. She would sooner join him. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She had one last thing of value, one final sacrifice to make. It was a desperate, impossible plan, one that required her to face the very definition of fear. But for Mike, she would walk through fire. She would walk straight toward the devils parked in the darkness. In the far corner of the Steel Grill's parking lot, under a buzzing neon sign that flickered between hot and ought, sat the machines. They were not just motorcycles. They were iron declarations of war against a quiet world. A dozen Harley-Davidson bikes, heavy with chrome and leather saddlebags, were parked in a perfect, menacing line. The men who owned them stood nearby, a pack of shadows in the weak light. They were Hell's Angels, their presence turning the diner's lot into occupied territory. Truckers finishing their shifts gave them a wide berth, paying for their gas, and leaving without making eye contact. The air around them was thick with the smell of cigarettes, old leather, and the faint, sharp tang of gasoline. Their leader was a man known only as Reaper. He was a mountain of denim and patched leather, a man who had clearly lived a life where mercy was a weakness. A thick, gray beard fell to the center of his chest, braided with small silver charms that looked vaguely pagan. His vest was a roadmap of his allegiance, covered in patches that spoke of long wars and questionable affiliations. He stood apart, smoking slowly, his eyes scanning the lot. He was the kind of man polite society crosses the street to avoid. He was the monster parents used to frighten their children, and he was the absolute last resort for a woman like Clara Miller. Clara watched them from the fogged-up window of her Saturn, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. This was insane. These men were criminals, outlaws, but the clock was ticking. Noon tomorrow was an execution. She had already tried the safe options. The legal aid office had an 8-week waiting list. The local police had told her it was a civil matter. The bank manager had laughed at her request for a $260 loan. The system had politely, firmly, and completely abandoned her. Desperation, she realized, was a key that unlocked doors you never ever wanted to walk through. Tonight it was the only key she had. She turned the ignition. The engine was dead. Her fuel was gone. It was a sign. She took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and opened the car door. The sound of it creaking open seemed impossibly loud, cutting through the night. Every head in the parking lot turned. The truckers, the night shift waitress smoking by the back door, and the entire motorcycle club. They all watched as this small, gray-haired woman, frail as a dried leaf, emerged from the battered sedan. She clutched her thin coat closed and began the longest walk of her life, each step on the cracked asphalt a separate act of terrifying courage. She stopped directly in front of Reaper. He was even larger up close, a genuine giant who blocked out the neon light behind him. He dwarfed her. The rest of the club fanned out slightly, creating a silent, intimidating semicircle around her. They didn't speak. They just watched. Reaper didn't flinch. He continued to smoke, looking down at her with an expression of pure, cold indifference. He had seen the world, and nothing in it surprised him. He waited for her to break, to scurry away like all the others. Clara, shaking so hard she could barely stand, did not move. "I need help," she whispered. The words were stolen by the wind, barely audible. Reaper's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He simply exhaled a cloud of smoke that enveloped her. She felt the eyes of the other bikers on her, judging her, dissecting her. She was prey that had wandered into the lion's den. Any moment she expected the laughter, the dismissal, the cruel joke. She was nothing to them. She was the invisible woman, the nuisance, the ghost in the parking lot. She had to make him see her. She had to make him understand what was at stake. The silence stretched, becoming a weapon in itself. Reaper's stillness was more terrifying than a shout. He was waiting, testing her. Clara knew she had one chance, one moment to break through the decades of armor he wore. Tears began to stream down her face, the hot tracks freezing instantly on her wind-chapped skin. "I don't have any money," she choked out, the admission tearing her pride to shreds. "I have nothing. They're taking everything." This was the bottom. This was the absolute end of her dignity. She was begging in a parking lot, in front of men who ate weakness for breakfast. "But I can pay," she said, her voice suddenly finding a sliver of Mike's old Marine strength. Her hand, trembling violently, dove into the deep pocket of her coat. It was the only thing in the pocket. She pulled her fist out and, in a final, desperate act of faith, she uncurled her fingers. She held her hand out. To him, palm up. Lying in the center of her chapped, wrinkled skin was a simple 14-karat gold wedding band. It was worn smooth from 40 years of marriage, of holding hands, of building a life. It was the last piece of Mike she had on her person. "It's gold," she sobbed, the tears coming uncontrollably now. "It was my husband's. It's all I have left of him. Please, they are going to sell him tomorrow. They're going to sell my husband." She wasn't just offering a ring. She was offering her entire life, her love, her memory. She was offering the only thing the system had not yet managed to steal. She was giving her soul to the devil in the parking lot, all for the chance to save the ashes of the man she loved. The world stopped. The buzzing of the neon sign, the distant rumble of the highway, the pounding in Clara's chest. It all went silent. Reaper stared at the ring. He saw the worn inscription on the inside, a testament to a promise kept. This tiny, 62-year-old woman was not begging for food or gas. She was fighting for the honor of a dead man. She was offering her most sacred relic. This was not weakness. This was a purity of heart he had not seen since his own world had burned down. This was a language of loyalty he understood perfectly. Reaper's massive gloved hand moved. Clara flinched, expecting him to snatch the ring. Instead, his fingers, thick as sausages and stained with oil, gently, almost tenderly, closed her small hand over the gold band. He pushed her fist back toward her own chest, forcing her to hold onto it. "Keep that, ma'am," he growled. His voice was a low rumble, like gravel shifting, like an engine turning over. It was the first time anyone had called her ma'am in months. It was a word of respect. He straightened to his full, terrifying height. The cold indifference was gone, replaced by a sudden focused intensity that was far more frightening. He looked over her head, past the diner, toward the dark town. He had made a decision. A debt had been offered, and a debt had been accepted, just not the one Clara intended. He was no longer a bystander. He was an instrument. His eyes found hers, and for the first time, she saw something other than a monster. She saw a soldier. He gave a sharp nod to the man beside him, his sergeant-at-arms. The man immediately pulled out a phone. Reaper looked back at Clara. His voice was no longer a growl. It was a command. "You said they. Who is they?" Clara, shaking, told him. She told him about the pain store She told him about Mr. Henderson, the manager who had refused to give her an extension. She told him about the auction at noon, the $267 debt, and the urn. She told him everything. Reaper listened, his jaw tightening, until she was finished. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Where is the auction?" Reaper listened. He stood there, a mountain of leather in the flickering neon light, and he truly listened. And what he heard was not just the story of a $267 debt. He heard the sound of a life being dismantled piece by piece by a system that was functioning exactly as it was designed. He heard the echo of every "no," every "I'm sorry, my hands are tied," and every "it's just our policy." Clara's desperation was not a sudden event. It was the result of 1,000 small bureaucratic paper cuts. What kind of world, he thought, pushes a 62-year-old widow to beg for her husband's ashes from a man wearing a Hell's Angels patch? A world that had left her no other door to knock on. Her first attempt to solve this 2 weeks prior had been at the Community First Bank. It was the same branch where she and Mike had proudly signed the mortgage papers for their small house in 1978. She sat at the desk of a young loan officer, a man barely 30, who smiled a practiced, empty smile. She explained the situation, her voice low with humiliation. She wasn't asking for charity. She was asking for a microloan, a temporary bridge. The officer typed her name into his computer. His smile faltered, replaced by a slight grimace. "Well, Mrs. Miller," he said, "it seems the medical debts from your husband's illness have severely impacted your credit rating. There's just nothing I can do." "Impacted," she repeated, a single sterile word for the financial avalanche that had buried them. "It's for my husband's ashes," she pleaded, the words catching in her throat. He was a Marine. The loan officer, now visibly uncomfortable, pushed a brochure across the polished desk. It was for a credit counseling service. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The algorithm is very clear. My hands are tied." He had looked at his computer screen, not at her. As he said it, she was not a person. She was a bad score, a red number on a spreadsheet. She walked out, the brochure crumpled in her fist, the air-conditioned chill of the bank feeling colder than the street. Her next stop was the Department of Social Services. The waiting room was a portrait of quiet despair, filled with tired mothers and old men who looked just as invisible as she felt. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and resignation. She took a number, C47. They were serving B12. She waited for 3.5 hours, watching a small television bolted to the wall drone on about a politician's scandal. When her number was finally called, she approached a window of thick, bulletproof glass. The caseworker on the other side looked at her through the speaker grill, her expression one of profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Clara explained it all again. The car, the storage unit, the deadline, the ashes. The caseworker sighed, the sound amplified by the microphone. Ma'am, we don't have emergency funds for personal storage. That's not a utility. We can't prevent a civil auction. Clara gripped the counter. But he was a veteran. Isn't there anything? The caseworker shook her head. The VA might have a program, but their intake office is downtown, and the wait list for assistance is currently 6 to 8 months. 6 to 8 months. The auction was in 10 days. The system didn't just fail you. It failed you on a timeline completely disconnected from the reality of human suffering. Defeated, she went back to the pay and store it. She would throw herself on the mercy of the manager, Mr. Henderson. She found him in his small, tidy office, a man with a thin mustache and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to his hand. He was the king of this tiny, concrete kingdom, and he knew it. Mr. Henderson, she began, I am begging you. I get my Social Security check in 2 weeks. I just need an extension, please. Henderson gave her a smile that did not reach his eyes. Clara, rules are rules. I've given you the legally required notice. The lien is filed. The auction is scheduled. It's out of my hands. It's just business, but you know what's in there, she whispered, the shame burning her face. I told you, it's my husband. His ashes. Henderson's smile tightened into a smirk. He saw her in the parking lot next door every day. He knew she was living in her car. He knew she was broken, and he enjoyed it. That's the sad part, isn't it? He said, tapping his pen on the clipboard. If those remains were so important to you, you probably should have paid your bill on time, don't you think? It was not the anger of a frustrated businessman. It was the casual, petty cruelty of a small man exercising his small power. She left his, office, shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. She had one final option, the proper one. She drove to the local police precinct. The officer at the front desk was built like a refrigerator, sipping a coffee, looking bored. She explained the situation, her voice trembling, telling him the manager was knowingly holding a veteran's remains hostage over a $267 debt. The officer sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. Ma'am, I'm sorry for your trouble, but that's a civil matter. That phrase, the universal shield of institutional indifference. He's not breaking the law. You signed a contract. Failure to pay gives him the right to auction the contents. But it's morally wrong, she stammered. He's desecrating a veteran's memory. The officer's patience, already thin, snapped. Ma'am, we deal with crime here. Robbery, assault. This is an overdue bill. You're wasting our time. You need to take this up with a lawyer. A lawyer, as if she could afford one. She backed away from the high counter, utterly defeated. The law, the very thing Mike had believed in and fought for, was not her protector. It was the weapon being used against her. The men in blue had made it clear. She was on her own. There was no one to call. 911 was not for people like her. That had been yesterday. Last night, after the police station, she had tried to sell the one thing she had left. She drove to a brightly lit, Cash 4 Gold shack near the highway. The man behind the bulletproof glass weighed Mike's ring, scraped it on a stone, and offered her $50. 50 for a 40-year marriage. She snatched it back from the tray, her heart pounding. On the drive back to the diner, a terrible grinding sound came from under the hood. The Saturn gave a final, rattling cough and coasted to a stop in the parking lot. The alternator was dead. Her shelter was now a metal coffin. This was the end of the line. She was out of gas, out of time, out of options, and out of hope. The system, from the bank to the police, had methodically stripped her of every last shred of dignity and support. They had all, in their own way, told her that her life, and Mike's memory, was worth less than $267. She was invisible, disposable, a problem to be ignored until she disappeared. The safe institutions were a fortress, and all the doors were locked from the inside. They had left her no choice. They had forced her hand. Reaper understood this. He recognized the pattern, the world of civil matters, and algorithms was a foreign language to him, but he understood the result. He lived by a different code, one that was brutally simple. You protect your own, you honor the fallen, and you do not, under any circumstances, allow a weasel like Henderson to profit from the desecration of a soldier's honor. The system had created this vacuum. The system had failed, and in the world Reaper inhabited, a failure of justice is a declaration of war. It was an invitation for a different kind of system to step in. He looked at his sergeant-at-arms, a man named Dogbone. Dogbone was already on his phone. He didn't need to be told. He knew the protocol. Yeah, it's an honor detail, Dogbone said into the phone, his voice low and hard. We got a brother, Marine, Vietnam. His ashes are being held hostage by a local scumbag. Auction is tomorrow. He paused, listening. Yeah, full chapter. He hung up and looked at Reaper. Cleveland is rolling. 80 bikes. They'll be at the state line by 10. 100. Reaper nodded. He turned to another man. Call Detroit. Call Fort Wayne. Tell them we're having a funeral. The tone of the group shifted instantly. The lazy, menacing vibe was gone, replaced by a sharp, military-like focus. Men started checking their bikes, zipping up their leathers, their movements economical and precise. Many of them had veteran patches on their own vests. Army, Navy, Marines. They were a tribe, bound by a different set of rules. Clara had, entirely by accident, invoked their most sacred one. This was no longer about her 267 debt. This was about a brother. This was about a principle. The system had refused to act, so they would. Reaper turned back to Clara. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also the first spark of something else, a desperate, fragile hope. Mr. Henderson wants to have a public auction, Reaper growled, a dark smile playing on his lips. That's fine. We'll give him one. We're gonna make sure it's the most well-attended auction this town has ever seen. He pointed to the back of his massive black Harley-Davidson. You're riding with me, ma'am. She looked at the leather seat, then at the man. She had asked for help, and she had just summoned an army. She took his gloved hand. Noon. The asphalt of the pay-in store. It was cold, the sky a sheet of battleship gray. Mr. Henderson stood near the rolled-up door of Unit 14B, his clipboard in hand, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. He was the undisputed king of this concrete graveyard, a tiny tyrant ruling over acres of lost memories and broken dreams. He relished the power, a small, pathetic crowd of auction-goers, the kind of people who profited from the misery of others, milled about, sipping from styrofoam cups. They looked like vultures, waiting for the lion to finish his meal so they could pick at the bones. Henderson checked his watch. 12:01. He was legally cleared to begin. He was about to shatter this woman's life over 267, and he was, in his small, petty heart, enjoying every second of it. It began not as a sound, but as a feeling, a low, distant vibration that hummed in the soles of their shoes, like a far-off earthquake. Henderson paused, annoyed by the interruption. The auction-goers looked around, confused. It was not a train. The tracks were miles away. It was a pressure in the chest, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the earth itself, growing stronger every second. A car alarm on a neighboring street was triggered by the vibration, its desperate wail drowned out by the approaching presence. The ground was shaking. The air itself felt heavy, charged with an impossible energy. Then they saw it. At the end of the long industrial street, a single headlight appeared, then another, then 10, then 50. A rolling river of chrome and black steel, a tidal wave of displaced veterans and hardened men, thundered toward them. The sound was no longer a rumble. It was an apocalyptic roar, the sound of 1,000 angry gods descending on a small patch of asphalt in Ohio. It was the sound of judgment. It was the sound of 200 Harley-Davidson engines tuned to the key of retribution, all arriving at the same time. This was not an arrival. It was an invasion. It was not just the local chapter. It was an army. They poured in from 3 different states. Cleveland, Detroit, Fort Wayne, an army of leather and patches, filling the parking lot, blocking the entrance, spilling onto the main road, shutting down all traffic in both directions. The sound of 200 V-twin engines idling in unison was deafening, a physical force that vibrated the cheap metal doors of the storage units. They formed a perfect, impenetrable wall of men and steel, a silent, menacing perimeter. They had, in 30 seconds, occupied Henderson's kingdom. Mr. Henderson's smug expression did not just fall, it shattered. His face went a pale, sickly white, the color of spoiled milk. The clipboard slipped from his limp fingers and clattered onto the asphalt. His jaw hung open. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring at the sea of men who had just surrounded him. These were not customers. These were not bidders. This was an occupation. His hand twitched toward his pocket. For the cell phone he was suddenly too terrified to touch. He looked like a man who had just realized he was trapped in a cage with a pride of lions. The few auction-goers scattered. They did not run. They backed away slowly, retreating to their rusty pickup trucks, fumbling with their keys, and locking the doors. In the neighboring auto body shop, faces appeared in the windows, eyes wide with terror. Before the metal blinds were snapped shut, the entire neighborhood held its breath. This was the invasion they had always heard stories about, the nightmare scenario of those people. Surely the police were coming, but the bikers just sat there, engines idling, a silent, patient wall of judgment. The sea of engines parted down the middle. Reaper's massive black Harley rolled slowly to the front, the engine's rhythmic thump-thump like the heartbeat of the entire army. He rolled to a stop just inches from Henderson. He killed the motor, a profound, terrible silence fell, broken only by the idling of 199 other machines. He swung his leg off, a deliberate, heavy movement. Tucked just behind his bike, Clara stood, small and trembling, but completely protected. He put a massive, gloved hand on her shoulder, a gesture of absolute ownership, and steered her gently behind his massive frame. Reaper walked directly toward the pale, trembling Henderson. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He moved with the lethal, unhurried calm of a man who has never, in his adult life, had to raise his voice to be obeyed. He stopped 2 feet from Henderson. The manager, a full foot shorter, was forced to look up, way up, into the biker's cold, merciless eyes. Henderson smelled of cheap cologne and a sudden, sharp tang of fear sweat. Reaper just looked at him, saying nothing, letting the crushing weight of 200 silent men do the work for him. Henderson finally found his voice. It was a high-pitched, pathetic squeak. This is private property. You can't be here. I'm calling the police. You're trespassing." Reaper almost smiled. The expression was all teeth. "We ain't here to trespass," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration. "We heard you was having an auction." He looked past Henderson at the open door of Unit 14B. "We're here for the auction." He nodded toward the front office. "Unit 14B, the one belonging to Mrs. Clara Miller. We're here to bid." The professional auctioneer, hired for the day, looked at Henderson, then at the 200 bikers, then back at Henderson. He was visibly shaking, his own clipboard rattling in his hand. Yes, Unit 14B." He tried to start his usual chant, but his voice cracked. We have an opening bid. The minimum due, that's $267.80. Henderson, vibrating with terror, just wanted them gone. "Sold," he tried to yell. "No," Reaper interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "That's an opening bid. We want to bid properly." Reaper turned his back on Henderson, a move of ultimate, profound disrespect. He faced his brothers. He unhooked his own helmet from his handlebars. "This woman," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the metal buildings, "offered us her husband's wedding ring to save his ashes. We don't take, we give." He held the helmet up. "Pass the damn helmet. If you believe power shouldn't protect predators, smash that like button. Your engagement proves people care more about justice than politics." The helmet began its journey, a black bucket moving through a sea of leather. The helmet was passed from one gloved hand to the next. It moved through the ranks, from the Cleveland chapter to the Detroit boys, from the Fort Wayne veterans to the local riders. But it was not coins. It was not single dollar bills. It was a flood of 20s, 50s, hundreds. Men reached deep into their vests, emptying their wallets without a second thought. This was not a collection. It was a tithe. It was a statement. In less than 2 minutes, the helmet was back in Reaper's hand, overflowing with green paper, bills spilling onto the ground. Reaper walked back to Henderson. He didn't count the money. He didn't ask for a receipt. He simply, deliberately, turned the helmet upside down. A cascade of cash, thousands of dollars, rained down onto the asphalt at Henderson's feet. The money piled up around his cheap, polished shoes, a monument of paper. "There's about $8,000 there," Reaper said, his voice flat and cold. "That covers her debt, and it pays for her unit, for life." He pointed at the office. "Now, get her a new key and a new lock. We're changing it." Clara let out a sound, a strangled sob of pure, unadulterated relief, and buried her face in her hands. But Reaper wasn't finished. Henderson, his eyes wide and greedy at the sight of the cash, immediately bent down to scoop it up. Wait, that's too much." Reaper put a massive black boot on the pile of cash, pinning it to the ground. Henderson froze. "We're not done," Reaper said. Henderson looked up, his newfound greed evaporating back into terror. "That," Reaper said, nodding at the cash, "was just the price of admission." He turned to his sergeant-at-arms. "Dogbone, Diablo, Brick, you're with me." He pointed, a gloved finger at Henderson, who looked like he was about to faint. "You, office, now." 10 of the largest, most scarred bikers dismounted, their boots hitting the pavement in unison. They followed Reaper toward the small front office. Henderson, now genuinely terrified for his life, scrambled ahead of them, fumbling for his keys, almost tripping over himself to obey. He looked like a rat being herded by wolves. The remaining 190 bikers did not move. They did not relax. They formed a silent, leather-clad wall blocking the street, blocking the view from the road, blocking any escape. They had, in effect, seized the entire property. The police were still nowhere to be seen. The system was still absent. This was a new jurisdiction now. This was Reaper's jurisdiction. The neighbors watching from behind their blinds understood. 911 was not coming. The authorities had, in their absence, ceded control to a higher, more immediate power, the law of the Hells Angels. They entered the office. It was small, cramped, and smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener. Henderson backed himself into a corner, behind his little particle board desk, a pathetic shield. What do you want?" Reaper didn't sit. He loomed, his presence filling the tiny room. "We're gonna go over your books," Reaper said, his voice a low, calm growl, "because I got a feeling you've been overcharging folks. I got a real strong feeling you've been running scams on military families, charging them illegal late fees." He picked up a stack of line notices from the desk. "Let's start with today's auction list." Inside the cramped office, Mr. Henderson's fraudulent world unraveled in minutes. Reaper and his men were not just brutes, they were veterans. They had run motor pools, managed supply depots, and reviewed payrolls. They recognized Henderson's messy ledger for what it was, the work of a petty thief. "What's this?" Dogbone growled, pointing to a line item. "A Patriot storage fee? You've been adding a $20 surcharge to every account with a military pension on file." Henderson began to sweat, stammering about administrative costs. Reaper just looked at him, his silence more damning than any accusation. They had him. The man who preyed on the vulnerable was now the one trapped in the cage, and the lions were very, very angry. The justice delivered was not physical. It was financial, meticulous, and absolute. Reaper didn't hit him. He broke him. He made Henderson sit at his own desk, his hands shaking, and call every single person on his fraudulent list to inform them of their refund. Then, Reaper took the $8,000 cash. He didn't just pay Clara's bill. He paid the outstanding bills for the other 5 units on that day's auction block. He paid for a single mother's storage, an elderly couple's, and another veteran's. He bled Henderson's profit margin dry in 10 minutes, using the cash to wipe the slate clean for every other person Henderson was preying on. But the final act was the most brutal. With the remaining cash, Reaper made one more call. He called the regional bank that held the mortgage on the pay-and-store IT franchise, a note Henderson was 2 months behind on himself. Reaper paid the defaulted amount, and with the leverage of Henderson's documented fraud, he bought the note. He purchased the man's entire business out from under him in less than an hour. He made Henderson sign the transfer papers. "You're fired," Reaper said, tossing the keys to a local VFW post commander he'd called to the scene. "This place is under new management. Now get off this property." With Henderson's reign over, Reaper walked back out into the cold air. He held the master key to Unit 14B. At his appearance, the 199 bikers who had been standing silent guard killed their engines. The sudden, total silence was deafening, a vacuum of respect. They dismounted as one. They formed 2 perfect, disciplined lines, creating a corridor, a path of honor. The aisle stretched from the metal door of Unit 14B all the way back to where Clara stood, trembling by Reaper's motorcycle. These hardened, scarred men the world called monsters, stood at perfect attention. Reaper walked the gauntlet alone. He reached the door and, with one powerful motion, yanked the corrugated metal door up. The sound of it rattling open was the only sound in the state of Ohio. He stepped into the dusty darkness. He did not look at the old furniture or the stacked boxes. His eyes went straight to the back shelf. With a reverence that seemed impossible for a man of his size and reputation, he gently picked up the simple wooden urn. He then took the folded triangle of the American flag, held it against his chest, and turned around. He was, in that moment, not a Hell's Angel. He was a soldier, retrieving a fallen brother. He walked slowly down the aisle of his men. He stopped directly in front of Clara, who was openly weeping, her hands over her mouth. He held the urn out to her with both massive, gloved hands. "This belongs to you, ma'am," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she never thought possible. She took it, clutching it to her chest, her first full, clean breath in months. Then, he presented her with the flag. "And this," he said, his voice low, "this belongs to a hero. We're honored to return him to you." She nodded, unable to speak, her world suddenly, violently, put right. But they were not finished. Reaper saw her dead Saturn, a symbol of her broken life. "That your car, ma'am?" She nodded. "Flathead," he yelled. A biker with grease permanently etched into his knuckles stepped forward. He opened the hood. Alternators fried, batteries shot. In less than an hour, the bikers had swarmed the car. They didn't just fix the alternator, they rebuilt the engine. They replaced the tires. They filled the tank with gas. And then, they filled the trunk. A dozen men returned from a local grocery store, loading her car with bags of food, water, and supplies, enough to last her a month. Clara stood in the center of the parking lot, holding her husband's ashes, watching this army of leather-clad angels restore her life. Mr. Henderson was gone, a ghost, his little kingdom of cruelty dismantled and given to the very veterans he had robbed. Clara Miller was no longer invisible. She was no longer a ghost. Reaper walked over and pressed a small, newly stitched patch into her hand. It was simple, just a few words. Biker's kin. Protected property. She was officially family. She was safe. The entire world knew it. They say money can't buy everything. But that day, in a cold parking lot in Ohio, the system learned a hard lesson. Sometimes, The smallest payment, a simple wedding ring offered in total desperation, can purchase the loyalty of an army, and that army, an army of men the world threw away, does not accept no for an answer. Clara Miller didn't just get her husband back, she got a family of 200 guardians. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that heroes exist. They don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather.